on a global basis, there are more and more people being forced to move. There are three reasons why people move on a global basis. One is for economic opportunity. One is because of political conflict or because they're being coerced into moving and trafficked. And the third one skips my mind right now. The third one is natural disasters and things like tsunamis, earthquakes, and climate change. By far the biggest movement of people is for the economic stimulation issue. And it's a mixture of people being trafficked into modern-day slavery and people genuinely moving to get a better economic opportunity. And as you very well know, there are some countries in the world where a huge proportion of the money that comes into the country is from foreign direct remittances. So that's huge. We made a calculation recently at the Organization of Migration that, and I said before, that 200 million people live outside of their country of origin. We calculate within 10 years that's going to be 500 million of the world's population. So people are moving on an increasing basis, and it's pretty hard to find out whether it's the coerced, the trafficked, climate change, but all of those things are making a difference, as well as personal choice in many countries. If you look at the demographics and the movement of people in the United States, 20 years from now, the majority of the population is going to be on both the coasts and around the Great Lakes. In China, everyone is moving or wants to move to the 200 cities with more than 1 million people. All of those movements of people give opportunities for criminal activity. So I'm not going to attempt to analyze which is the biggest influence. All I know is that when people move, criminals get involved. And one of the things we're trying to do in our industry, because one of my other non-day jobs is I'm the head of the Recruitment Industry Federation globally. A lot of the activity of trafficking people happens through labor agents that recruit them, and people think they're getting into a decent job, and then they're trafficked. One that I saw recently was shocking. I spoke at a conference in Ningbo in China. You might not know where Ningbo is. It's on the Pearl River Delta, and it's a fast-growing industrial city. And I was exhausted. I'd flown in, spoke at the conference, went to the bar for a cocktail, because I said, enough, I'm not going to the gym today, I'm going to the bar. And I sat down, and this is a provincial city, brand new hotel, you know how the Chinese infrastructure is expanding. And within 3 minutes, a very attractive young lady came across and said, you buy me a drink? And I said, why? She said, I would like a drink and I would like some company. And I said, listen, I'll buy you a drink if you tell me your story, because you're from the Philippines, you've been trafficked here, and I want to know how it happened. Because you ain't Chinese, because I speak a bit of Chinese. You've got a very interesting Filipino-English accent. And what happened was she had been recruited as a secretary in the Philippines, in Manila, to go to Hong Kong for a job that was guaranteed. ID, passport, everything taken away. As soon as she got into Hong Kong, she was trafficked out by the snakehead gangs to a remote part of Hong Kong, and they said, well, your job didn't come up, and now you owe us $4,000. You don't have any money. Oh, well, you're going to have to work for us, and we'd like you just to do a very simple job of being a hostess in a club, just serving drinks, and you know where it goes from there. Hostess, to being prostituted, to being shipped across the water to Shenzhen, to being taken by snakehead gangs to Ningbo. She had been in Ningbo for 9 years. She'd gone to the local police authorities, she'd gone to the consulate of the Philippines, and they all rejected her, A, because they were being paid off by the police force, and secondly, the police force were being paid off by the snakehead gangs, and secondly, she had no ID. That started with a recruitment agent in Manila. One of the problems with the recruitment industry on a global basis is that in some countries it is legal to charge an individual to find them a job. What we're trying to do on a global basis is to get every government to enact the law that follows from Convention 181 at the International Labour Office, which every government signed up for, which says, here's how the recruitment industry and people should be treated when they are being put to work. And one of the elements of Convention 181, which should be signed into law in every country, is we cannot charge you to find you a job. This was one of the issues in Bangladesh. Guess whose wife runs the biggest recruitment company in Bangladesh? The Prime Minister's. they allow charging of individuals in little villages to find them jobs in the Gulf, take their ID away, and then ship them, and they're there for 10, 15 years, paying off a $6,000 bond on a salary in construction of $202 a month, three-quarters of which goes for accommodation and food, $10 of which is sent back home, and the rest is paid off the bond. So the recruitment industry has a big responsibility, and we're trying to make sure that certification happens throughout recruitment industry globally, and that governments ban illegal recruitment agencies and enforce that criminal gangs cannot get into shifting people around either in the country or worldwide. Sorry, that was a long answer and an example, but we've got a huge problem, and this problem isn't going to get fixed this year, next year. I'll be long dead before we solve this. Modern-day slavery, it's not modern-day slavery, it's the same kind of slavery you had 100 years ago, and we've still got it, and we haven't been able to fix it in the country that first tried to do something about this in emancipation.
Just to end, that just shows you that, you know, manpower and the power of the corporation to utilize their core competencies and can really make a difference. And I think that's, you know, really the role of business, and manpower should be really commended and applauded for that.
You know, it happens, I think, in terms of identification. There's several risk factors, and a couple have been mentioned. Statelessness, those who don't have social networks, resources, those who aren't aware of their rights, children, women who have been disempowered, who don't have control over their movement. And I think it's such a broad area. I think if you suspect something, you just ask questions. I mean, in this particular case, in a lot of domestic servitude cases, if you don't see someone leaving the house, if it's a child who's not going to school, if it's someone at a nail salon or a restaurant that you're visiting and you see them there all the time and you're not quite sure if they're actually going to school, seeing friends, engaging with family members, I mean, that's a red flag right there. Those who have experienced physical trauma or physical abuse, if there are signs of that, if there are signs of neglect, if they have no contact with their families. Even just asking, so what are the rules around your workplace situation? What do you like? What don't you like? Don't ask, were you forced? Were you trafficked? No one's going to answer that question. No one raises their hand and say, I'm a slave or I've been trafficked. But, you know, open-ended questions. And there are several resources on a local level as well as on a federal level. Here in the United States, there is a national trafficking hotline that you can call that the Polaris Project runs. I think it's a good hotline to call in that it's one that's open for potential victims, for service providers, for tip line, and then they will refer you to appropriate sources. And they may refer you to a local law enforcement agency, depending on the situation, to a service provider if that person perhaps needs services before they need a police officer involved, and also age-appropriate services. And then here in Chicago, there's the Cook County State's Attorney's Human Trafficking Task Force and other local NGOs that work on cases.
If you're dealing with someone who has lost all sense of time, somebody who's working 24/7 might be transported back and forth to work in a van with darkened windows or in the trunk of a car with a blanket over them. So, you know, you're having your nails done and you realize the individual who's working on you has no sense of time and no sense of geography. They don't know there's a new, you know, hot dog stand around the corner to grab lunch, something like that. And a huge clue is the individual does not have control of their own documentation. And that's a biggie.
Oh, that is absolutely huge, and we're trying as a movement on a global basis, and especially through my industry, because guess what? A lot of this trafficking happens through labor agents, where young people think they're going to get a decent job somewhere else, and then they're trafficked. And we're working on bilateral agreements between governments, and I'll just tell you, 2 seconds, the most recent one that my industry got in, which was with the government of Bangladesh. We went to Dakar, we took the head of the Global Textiles Trade Union, we took 16 manufacturers of textiles from Madagascar all the way to the Gulf states. Because, just let me tell you the Bangladesh situation, 11% of the GDP of Bangladesh, and that's a big slice of GDP, is from foreign direct remittances of people that have mostly been trafficked to the Gulf states for servitude labor. And one thing that happens immediately is the labor agent takes their ID away, they've got no way of appealing even. They can't get out of the country, they've got no ID, they can't go to the embassy. We were down on the border with United Nations High Commission of Refugees on the Egyptian-Libyan border when all of the violence started, the bombing started in Libya. 2 days later, and we thought we were going to get an influx of Egyptians trying to come back to Egypt, 7,000 Bangladeshis came to the border with no identification. They had been trafficked from Bangladesh into Libya to work mostly for Chinese companies. What we did was we said to the government of Bangladesh and the governments of the Gulf states, we want you to put a bilateral treaty in place for the safe migration of workers that have been correctly treated, trained, they've got correct insurance, and they do have a return path to Bangladesh. We just heard last week the Bangladeshi government have signed that into law in the country, which is absolutely amazing. So that one of ID, that is a key message that once you see somebody without ID, there's something going wrong somewhere.
I think this is such a hot spot. I just want to take a second. And so if you're a Bangladeshi or an Indian and you end up in a textile factory in somewhere in the Middle East, they take away your documents, take your passport, and all of a sudden if you lose your job, you're now illegal. And it's a complete nightmare.